Hey, what's up? Back at you with more Legends of the Egyptian Gods, hieroglyphic texts and translations by E.A. Wallace Budge. And I'm want to read more from the part quoting Plutarch about like ancient Egyptian religion, because it's like it seems to it even gets better. Like, my last video was explaining how he was saying that the main attribute of gods is science and knowledge, and the best way and the most complete and genuine way to worship them is to study them. And since they're and he was talking about the heavenly gods, so that is the planets and the stars and the moon and stuff. But it cut me off, so my phone cut me off after like 20 minutes or something, so I'm just gonna continue in this section. Let's see. History of Isis. All right, so I've tried to do it before, like putting the camera on the book, but that's even more difficult. I mean, either way is kind of awkward. Trying to put it on the book while reading the book is like awkward. So let's see. Doctrine. First and chief being. All right, so I think I finished off where he's talking about how the end and aim of all these toils and labors is the attainment of the knowledge of the first and chief being, who alone is the object of the understanding of the mind. And this knowledge of the shut up, Oreo. This knowledge of the goddess, and this knowledge of the goddess invites us to seek after, as being near and dwelling continually with her. So I was saying at the end of the last video that might be influenced by Zoroastrianism, which was like a monotheistic religion of the Persian Empire, which was the dominant empire around that time. Let's see, or one of the dominant empires. So, it influenced a lot of surrounding peoples. There's a lot of people who believe that that's why the Hebrews became monotheist, is due to the influence of the Persians who freed them from Babylon. And this is also what the very name of her temple promiseth to us, that is to say, the knowledge and understanding of the eternal and self-existent being. Now it is called Ision, which suggests that if we approach the temple of the goddess rightly and with purity, we shall obtain the knowledge of that eternal and self-existent being. So it's like, just realize that like none of this is inconsistent with astronomy. Astronomy filtered through a symbolic and ritualistic framework. The goddess Isis is said by some authors to be the daughter of Hermes, which is Mercury, and by others of Prometheus, who I'm not sure what Prometheus is. Hamlet's Mill claims that Prometheus is a form of Zeus, which is Jupiter, but that I can't really confirm that. Um, both of them famous for their philosophic turn of mind. So Hermes and Prometheus are both like known as the, the philosophical gods, which is to say, the scientific gods. That like that's what philosophy means, science. So, in modern uh, jargon, it's used to mean like a very specific type of science, basically the science of analysis of I don't know, sort of abstract analysis of reality and uh, but it's still just science. I mean, it's still just a mix of like psychology and anthropology and sociology. So, yeah, philosophy means the love of knowledge. So it's basically the pursuit of knowledge. And Hermes, Hermes, Mercury, and basically all his guys is like Mercury is like the planet of, or one of the planets most associated with knowledge, as Hermes, as Odin, as Thoth, as not sure if he's like Nergal or something. I don't know. Anyway, then the latter is Prometheus is supposed to have first taught mankind wisdom and foresight, as the former is reputed to have invented letters and music. So Hermes reputed to have invented letters and music. Although, so I think so was Orpheus and etc. They likewise call the former of the two muses at Hermopolis Isis, as well as Dikaiosune, she being none other, it is said, than wisdom, pointing out the knowledge of divine truths to her votaries, the true hierophori and hierostoli. Now, by the former of these are meant such who carry about them locked up in their souls, as in a chest, the sacred doctrine concerning the gods, purified from all such superfluities as superstition may have added thereto, and the holy apparel with which the hierostoli adorn the statues of these deities, which is partly of a dark and gloomy and partly of a more bright and shining color, seems aptly just going to skip the footnotes, aptly enough to represent the notions which this doctrine teaches us to entertain of the divine nature itself, partly clear and partly obscure. And inasmuch as the devotees of Isis after their decease are wrapped up in these sacred vestments, is not this intended to signify that this holy doctrine still abides with them, and that this alone accompanies them in another life? So that might be referring to the holy apparel might be the type of linen that like the priesthood wore and stuff, and that the dead were buried in. For 'tis not the length of the beard or the coarseness of the habit which makes a philosopher. So even back in those days, the scientists, the scholars were poor like me. They had like shitty clothes and long beards and, well, I don't know, the coarseness of the habit. I don't know if linen is coarse or not. Which makes a philosopher, habit being like clothes. So neither will these frequent shavings or the mere wearing of a linen vestment constitute a votary of Isis. He alone is a true servant or follower of this goddess. So here he's using the term philosopher to mean a religionist. And this makes perfect sense because they were the same thing, science was religion. religion was science, and nobody knew that or epitomized that more than Plutarch. Um, he alone is a true servant or follower of this goddess, who, after he has heard and has been made acquainted in a proper manner with the history of the actions of these gods, searches into the hidden truths which lie concealed under them, and examines the whole by the dictates of reason and philosophy. Nor indeed ought such an examination to be looked on as unnecessary, whilst there are so many ignorant of the true reason even of the most ordinary rites observed by the Egyptian priests, such as their shavings and wearing linen garments. So this is funny, because he's writing like 2,000 years ago, and he's saying, like, he's talking about all the ignorance of Europeans regarding Egyptian traditions. And, you know, he he would be totally mortified by how much worse it's gotten today, because yeah, it's got worse. But he's saying that even in those times there was so much confusion. He says, some indeed there are who never trouble themselves to think at all about these matters, whilst others rest satisfied with the most superficial accounts of them. Quote, they pay a peculiar veneration to the sheep, therefore they think it their duty not only to abstain from eating its flesh, but likewise from wearing its wool. They are continually mourning for the gods, therefore they shave themselves. The light azure blossom of the flax resembles the clear and bloomy color of the ethereal sky, therefore they wear linen. Whereas the true reason of the institution and observation of these rites is but one, and that common to all of them, namely the extraordinary notions which they entertain of cleanliness, persuaded as they are, according to the saying of Plato, none but the pure ought to approach the pure. Now no superfluity of our food and no excrementitious substance is looked upon by them as pure and clean. Such, however, are all kinds of wool and down, our hair and our nails. It would be the highest absurdity, therefore, for those who, whilst they are in a course of purification, are at so much pains to take off the hair from every part of their own bodies, at the same time to clothe themselves with that of other animals. So when we are told by Hesiod, quote, not to pare our nails whilst we are present at the festivals of the gods, we ought to understand that he intended hereby to inculcate that purity wherewith we ought, the thing, we ought to come prepared before we enter upon any religious duty. That we have not to make ourselves clean, whilst we ought to be occupied in attending to the solemnity itself. Now, with regard to flax, this springs out of the immortal earth itself, and not only produces a fruit fit for food, but moreover furnishes a light and neat sort of clothing extremely agreeable to the wearer, adapted to all the seasons of the year, and not in the least subject, as is said, to produce or nourish vermin. But more of this in another place. And as a random aside, my own paternal ancestors, the Ulster Scots, were flax. They grew flax and spun linen. They were the weavers of Northern Ireland, and they came to America through on linen ships. So, and then they were the real like force behind the American Revolution. And then the linen, and then they tried to rise up. They tried to break Ireland off as well, but they got suppressed. But they used the linen trade as you know the basis for their revolutionary activities. And so anyway, flax. It's good. Flaxseed is good for your skin, I think, and maybe your eyes or something. I don't know. Now the priests are so scrupulous in endeavoring to avoid everything which may tend to the increase of the above mentioned excrementitious substances, that on this account they abstain not only from most sorts of pulse, not sure what pulse is, and from the flesh of sheep. Maybe pulse is the hair of an animal, like hides or something. Um, and the flesh of sheep and swine, but likewise in their solemn purifications they even exclude salt from their meals. This they do for many reasons, but chiefly because it whets their appetites and incites them to eat more than they otherwise would. Now, as to salt being accounted impure, because, as Aristagoras tells us, many little insects are caught in it whilst it is hardening, and are thereby killed therein. This view is wholly trifling and absurd. From these same motives also they give the Apis bull his water from a well, specially set apart for the purpose, and they prevent him altogether from drinking of the Nile. Not indeed that they regard the river as impure and polluted because of the crocodiles which are in it, as some pretend, for there is nothing which the Egyptians hold in greater veneration than the Nile, but because its waters are observed to be particularly nourishing and fattening, and they strive to prevent fatness in Apis as well as in themselves, for they are anxious that their bodies should sit as light and easy about their souls as possible, and that their mortal parts should not oppress and weigh down the divine and immortal. So, like, what he's explaining is there's all these sayings that people say, oh, this kind of kooky reason is the reason for this and that, but it's mostly false. Like, it's mostly really like utilitarian reasons that these practices were followed. And this might be, basically from the mythological tradition itself, wherein, you know, uh, true facts are given, but through mythological stories. So the mythological aspect is, and so if you know how to read it, then you know to kind of discard, or only, it's only for amusement, that part of trying to explain why they do this. And probably a lot of people would understand actually the reasons why. So it's hard to know if these are truly like just if this is truly just confusion, or if this is myth in the sense of, deliberate and understood uh, falsehood mixed with, falsehoods with truth. Um, just as in religion, just as in the rest of religion. The priests of the sun at Heliopolis never carry wine into their temples, for they regard it as indecent for those who are devoted to the service of any god to indulge in the drinking of wine whilst they are under the immediate inspection of their lord and king. The priests of the other deities are, so he's talking about Re, like the sun god Re, or what people call Ra. But Re, Heliopolis being like on, more or less, like On was basically, or On or Anu is basically in or around Cairo, I believe. I think. Yeah. So they're against wine. The priests of the other deities are not so scrupulous in this respect, for they use it, though sparingly. During their more solemn purifications, they abstain from wine wholly, and they give themselves up entirely to study and meditation, and to the hearing and teaching of those divine truths which treat of the divine nature. Even the kings who are likewise. So again, the divine nature is the actual attributes of these planets and stars, and the the cycles and etc. Even the kings who are likewise priests only partake of wine in the measure which is prescribed for them in the sacred books, as we are told by Hecatus. Um, so I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff about who ate fish. Like some of them didn't eat fish, or but the part that I really was digging on was, I guess it's later on. Um, it's saying that, just explaining that how shrouded in mystery all, like, everything about Egypt was, and how much misunderstanding there was in Greece. The Greeks were kind of like the man in Plato's cave regarding Egypt. They had like no idea. They just saw like the false parts of the mythology, and they didn't understand the truths that it was supposed to convey. Um, so he says like everything was hidden, concealed. So cautious and reserved was the Egyptian wisdom in those things which appertain to religion. And this is still further evinced from those voyages which have been made into Egypt by the wisest men among the Greeks, namely by Solo, Thales, Plato, Eudoxus, Pythagoras, and as some say, even by Lycurgus himself, on purpose to converse with the priests. Um, so that's the purpose of their visit. And we're also told that Eudoxus was a disciple of Cnophis and the Memphite, Solo of Sonchus, the Sate, and Pythagoras of Oenophis, the Heliopolite or Heliopolite. But none of these philosophers seems either to have been more admired and in greater favor with the priests, or to have paid a special regard to their method of philosophizing than this last named, who has particularly imitated their mysterious and symbolical manner in his own writings. And like them, so he's talking about Pythagoras, and like them conveyed his doctrines to the world in a kind of riddle. So yeah, this is what religion was. True things about the planets and stars and land masses were conveyed, but through riddles. For many of the precepts of Pythagoras come nothing short of the hieroglyphical representations themselves, such as eat not in a chariot, or sit not on a measure, or plant not a palm tree, and stir not the fire with a sword in the house. So like these are clearly like mythological. These are not literal things, but they're often conveyed as if they're literal. And I myself am of the opinion that when the Pythagoreans appropriated the names of several of the gods to particular numbers, as that of Apollo to the unit, of Artemis to the duad, of Athene to the seven, and of Poseidon to the first cube, in this they allude to something which the founder of their sect saw in the Egyptian temples, or to some ceremonies performed in them, or to some symbols there exhibited. Thus, their great king and lord Osiris is represented by the hieroglyph for an eye and a scepter, the name itself signifying many-eyed. As we are told by some who would derive it from the words. So I'm not sure about this etymology. I think most of his etymology is probably wrong, but it's not. But he's right in the general thing that he says. When you hear, therefore, the mythological tales which the Egyptians tell of their gods, their wanderings, their mutilations, and many other disasters which befell them, remember what has just been said, and be assured that nothing of what is thus told you is really true, or ever happened in fact. For can it be imagined that it is the dog itself which is reverenced by them under the name of Hermes? He means like the dog-headed ape that Thoth is sometimes shown as. It is the qualities of this animal, his constant vigilance, and his acumen in distinguishing his friends from his foes, which have rendered him, as Plato says, a meet emblem of that God who is the chief patron of intelligence. So he's saying everything is symbolic, nothing is literal. Virtually nothing is literal in ancient religion of Egypt or really anywhere. Nor can we imagine that they think that the sun, like a newly born babe, springs up every day out of a lily. It is quite true that they represent the rising sun in this manner. They represent it. It's stylistic representation. But the reason is because they wish to indicate thereby that it is moisture to which we owe the first kindling of this luminary. Not sure about that, but in like manner, the cruel and bloody king of Persia, Ochus, who not only put to death great numbers of the people, but even slew the Apis bull himself, and afterwards served him up in a banquet to his friends, is represented by them by a sword, and by this name he is still to be found in the catalogue of their kings. This name, therefore, does not represent his person, but indicates his base and cruel qualities, which were best suggested by the picture of an instrument of destruction. So they're saying that the guy was not just a walking sword. That's just a symbol. But honestly, that whole thing sounds very symbolic and astronomical. So chances are a lot of that about the Apis bull might not be factual either. If therefore, O Clea, you will hear and entertain the story of these gods from those who know how to explain it consistently with religion and philosophy, if you will steadily persist in the observance of all these holy rites which the laws require of you, and are moreover fully persuaded that to form true notions of the divine nature is more acceptable to them than any sacrifice or mere external act of worship can be, you will by this means be entirely exempt from any danger of falling into superstition, an evil no less to be avoided than atheism itself. So what he's saying by superstition is no less to be avoided than atheism. He means it's just as bad to think that the stories of the gods are literally true as it is to just completely dismiss them as meaningless. You just have to understand the meaning behind them. Now, the story of Isis and Osiris, its most insignificant and superfluous parts being omitted, runs thus. The goddess Re, they say, having accompanied with Kronos by stealth, was discovered by Helios, who straightway cursed her and declared that she should not be delivered in any month or year. Hermes, however, being also in love with the same goddess, in return for the favors which he had received from her, went and played at dice with Selene, and won from her the 70th part of each day. So these are these stories to explain like the movements of the planets and the different days and all this. These parts he joined together and made from them 5 complete days, and he added them to 360 days of which the year formerly consisted. These 5 days are to this day called the epigomene, that is, the superadded, and they are observed by them as